Imagine you're standing in front of a locked door. You've been demanding for 6 weeks that someone on the other side open it. They refuse. So what do? You add another lock from your side. This is not a metaphor. This is exactly what just happened in the Strait of Hormuz. After 21 hours of peace negotiations in Islamabad that achieved nothing, President Trump announced a naval blockade of the very same strait he's been demanding Iran keep open. And in doing so, he may have executed the biggest strategic self-goal in modern American history. Let's rewind 48 hours. Islamabad, Pakistan. Vice President Vance sits across from Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi. Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif is mediating. China and Russia have observers in adjacent rooms. The talks lasted 21 hours, marathon negotiations, round-the-clock diplomacy. The result? Nothing. Zero. Complete breakdown. Within hours of the talks collapsing, Trump announces the blockade. The timing is not coincidental. This was a pre-planned fallback, a plan B that becomes plan A when diplomacy fails. But here's what almost nobody is analyzing.
The single demand that killed these talks wasn't about oil. It wasn't about sanctions. It wasn't even about the nuclear program in general. It was about uranium enrichment levels. Vance walked into that room and demanded that Iran reduce its uranium enrichment to below 5% within 30 days. Not 60%, not 90%, 30 days. Now, let me give you context. Iran currently enriches uranium to approximately 60%. Weapons-grade threshold is 90%. They've been at this level for over a year. The infrastructure, the centrifuges, the technical expertise, all operational. And Vance demanded they dismantle this in a month? This wasn't a negotiation. This was an ultimatum designed to fail. But here's the question nobody in Western media is asking. Whose idea was this 30-day uranium demand? Because it certainly didn't come from the Pentagon. CENTCOM has been publicly stating for weeks that they want de-escalation in the Gulf. General Kurilla testified before Congress that a Hormuz closure would be catastrophic for American interests. So where did this demand originate? The answer is 3,000 kilometers west of Islamabad, in Tel Aviv. During the exact same 21 hours that Vance was in Pakistan, Benjamin Netanyahu gave a televised address. His exact words, "This is not over yet, not even close." Not "we hope for peace," not "we support the talks." Not over yet. And while Vance was negotiating, Israeli jets were bombing southern Lebanon, not in response to attacks, proactive strikes during peace talks. The sabotage didn't come from Tehran, it came from Tel Aviv. Because here's what Israel understands that Trump apparently doesn't. Any deal that keeps Iran's nuclear program intact, even at 5% enrichment, is unacceptable to Netanyahu's coalition. They want complete capitulation, total dismantlement, zero enrichment. And they have enough leverage over this administration to ensure their demands get inserted into American negotiating positions. Now we arrive at the blockade itself, and this is where the contradictions become surreal. On March 15th, CENTCOM issues a statement. Freedom of navigation through the Strait of Hormuz remains a top priority. On March 18th, Trump announces a naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. Let me be very clear about what a blockade means. In international law, a blockade is an act of war. It's not sanctions, it's not pressure. It's a naval operation designed to prevent all maritime traffic, including neutral vessels, from entering or leaving a specific area. Trump is now blocking the very strait his own military command says must remain open. The Pentagon must be in absolute chaos right now, because CENTCOM's entire regional strategy for the past 6 weeks has been preventing Hormuz closure, and now the president has ordered them to be the ones closing it. This isn't 4D chess, this is playing checkers on a chessboard while insisting you're winning at poker. And it gets worse.
The Wall Street Journal reported yesterday, citing 3 Pentagon officials, that Trump is actively considering military strikes on Iranian nuclear facilities within the next 72 hours. So let me get this straight. We just failed at diplomacy, we're now blockading a strait we need open, and we're considering airstrikes that would guarantee the strait closes permanently. This is not strategy, this is escalation searching for a justification. Let me now explain in detail why this blockade will fail. Not might fail, will fail. And I'll give you 5 structural reasons. Reason number 1. This blockade hurts America more than it hurts Iran. The Strait of Hormuz is the world's most critical oil choke point. Every day, 21 million barrels of crude oil pass through this 21-mile-wide channel. That's roughly 21% of global petroleum. Now, who needs that oil? Not Iran. Iran's own oil exports have already been sanctioned into irrelevance. They export maybe 1.5 million barrels per day, mostly to China through covert channels. A blockade barely touches them. But you know who does need Hormuz oil? Japan, South Korea, India, European refineries, and yes, American allies across the board. Within 48 hours of this blockade announcement, Brent crude jumped 14%, WTI crude up 12%, gasoline futures hit a 9-month high. American consumers will be paying $5.50 per gallon by next month, maybe $6 in California. And here's the kicker: Iran doesn't need to do anything. They can just sit back and watch America blockade itself into a recession. Trump has essentially volunteered to be the villain in everyone else's energy crisis. China doesn't have to say a word. India doesn't have to choose sides. They just point to Washington and say, they did this, not us. This is the definition of a strategic self-goal.
Reason number 2, America is completely alone in this blockade. When the US enforced the Libya no-fly zone in 2011, it had NATO backing. When it patrolled the South China Sea, it had Quad partners. Even the disastrous Iraq invasion had the UK, Australia, Poland. This blockade, solo mission. The UK declined to participate. Official statement: we support freedom of navigation. France refused. Macron called it counterproductive to regional stability. Germany, not even considered. Saudi Arabia, they've been quietly increasing diplomatic contact with Tehran. They want no part of this. Even the UAE, historically hawkish on Iran, has gone silent. So who's enforcing this blockade? The US Fifth Fleet, alone, trying to control a choke point that the entire world economy depends on. You cannot enforce a blockade without international legitimacy. This isn't 1995. The world doesn't just fall in line anymore. And that brings me to the elephant in the room. Reason number 3. China just called America's bluff, publicly, humiliatingly. 2 days ago, Chinese Defense Minister Admiral Dong Jun gave a press conference in Beijing, and he said something that should be front-page news everywhere, but isn't. Quote, Chinese flagged vessels will continue normal maritime operations through international waters. We expect all parties to respect freedom of navigation. Now decode that. Normal operations means Chinese tankers are going through Hormuz. All parties means the United States. Dong Jun just told the US Fifth Fleet, try to stop us. And here's why that's catastrophic for Washington. They can't. If the US Fifth Fleet boards a Chinese oil tanker in the Strait of Hormuz, that is an act of war against a nuclear power, not Iran, China. And Beijing knows this, so they're sending vessels through deliberately, daring America to enforce its own blockade. And what are the options? Option A, board the Chinese ship, start World War III over a tanker. Option B, let it through, prove the blockade is theater. There is no option C. China has turned America's blockade into a humiliation waiting to happen.
But it's not just a naval bluff. China is quietly arming Iran. U.S. intelligence confirmed last week that Chinese-made MANPADS, man-portable air defense systems, have been delivered to Iranian Revolutionary Guard units in Bandar Abbas. These are the same systems that can target helicopters, drones, and low-flying jets. Now, why does this matter? Because if Trump orders airstrikes on Iranian nuclear sites, those jets will be flying through airspace now defended by Chinese weapons. And here's the geopolitical earthquake nobody's talking about. This creates the Taiwan precedent. If America can blockade Iran's coast over a nuclear program, why can't China blockade Taiwan over semiconductors? If Washington can interdict third-party vessels near Iranian waters, why can't Beijing do the same near Taiwanese ports? The legal logic is identical. The international law framework is the same. Trump just handed China the playbook for isolating Taiwan and the justification to call it defensive. Reason number 4, Iran still hasn't used its real leverage, the Red Sea. Everyone is focused on the Strait of Hormuz. That's the wrong strait. The critical choke point isn't in the Persian Gulf. It's 1,500 miles southwest at the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, the entrance to the Red Sea, the Suez Canal shortcut to Europe. And who controls the western shore? Houthis, Iranian-backed Houthis in Yemen. For the past year, Houthi forces have launched sporadic attacks on commercial shipping, enough to be annoying, not enough to shut down the route. That was intentional restraint. But if Trump actually blockades Hormuz and strikes Iranian nuclear sites, that restraint disappears. Imagine Hormuz blocked from the east, Bab el-Mandeb blockaded from the west. Europe now has to route all oil shipments around Africa, around the Cape of Good Hope. That adds 3 weeks to delivery time. It doubles shipping insurance costs. It turns a regional crisis into a global supply chain collapse. And Iran doesn't even have to do it themselves. They just give Houthis the green light and a few more anti-ship missiles. Trump is thinking 1 choke point. Iran is thinking 2. That's the difference between tactics and strategy. Reason number 5. Russia wins. Again. Moscow hasn't fired a single shot in this crisis, hasn't issued a single threat, hasn't moved a single naval vessel, and they're about to become the biggest beneficiary. Here's the math. Brent crude is currently at $91 per barrel. If this blockade persists for 2 weeks, analysts project $115. If it escalates to airstrikes, $140 is not impossible. Russia exports roughly 7.5 million barrels of oil per day. At current prices, that's $682 million per day. At $140 per barrel, that becomes $1.05 billion per day, an extra $370 million per day, pure profit. That's $11 billion per month in additional revenue, while doing absolutely nothing. The Ukraine war has been bleeding Russian finances for 2 years. Western sanctions have been working, slowly, painfully, but working. And Trump just gave Putin a $130+ billion annual bailout. Because here's what people forget. Russia doesn't need Hormuz. Their oil goes through Baltic ports, Black Sea terminals, and pipelines to China. They're geographically insulated from this entire crisis. So while American allies scramble for alternative supplies, Russia casually increases market share and rakes in sanctions-busting revenue. Putin must be laughing, not just smiling, laughing. So if this blockade is strategically insane, economically suicidal, and diplomatically isolating, why is it happening? One word: ego. Go back and watch Trump's statements on Iran over the past decade. There's a pattern. 2018, if Iran threatens the United States, they will suffer consequences the likes of which few have ever suffered. 2020, I could take out Iran in 1 hour. 1 hour. People don't understand how easy it would be. 2025. Iran will bend the knee or they will cease to exist. This isn't policy. This is personal. Trump has built his entire brand on dominance, on never backing down, on making them pay. And Iran didn't bend. For 6 weeks, they refused. They called his bluff. They waited him out. And for someone whose entire political identity is predicated on winning, that is intolerable. So now we have a blockade that serves no strategic purpose, except to prove that Trump doesn't lose negotiations. Except he already lost. The moment he announced a blockade instead of a deal, he lost. He just doesn't realize it yet.
Let's talk about the AI Jesus incident, because it's not unrelated. Last week, a tech company released an AI chatbot called AI Jesus that gives biblical advice. Users can confess sins, ask for guidance, get scripture interpretations, all powered by GPT-4. The Pope condemned it. The Vatican called it digital blasphemy, and Trump defended it, called it innovation and religious freedom. Now, why am I bringing this up in a geopolitics video? Because it reveals the same pathology, the belief that technology and force can replace wisdom and restraint. You don't need diplomacy if you have a blockade. You don't need clergy if you have a chatbot. You don't need strategy if you have the biggest military. This is the mindset driving American foreign policy right now, and it's colliding with a world that stopped working that way 20 years ago. So let me give you 3 predictions, based not on speculation, but on historical pattern recognition. Prediction 1. The blockade will be quietly abandoned within 14 days. Not officially. They won't call it a retreat. They'll rebrand it. Maybe tactical repositioning. Maybe enhanced surveillance posture. But it will end, because the economic blowback will become undeniable, because allies will start screaming, because oil at $120 per barrel creates political crises in every capital. Prediction 2, Iran will not retaliate directly. They don't need to. Their strategy for the past 40 years has been let your enemies exhaust themselves. They'll wait, they'll watch the blockade fail, they'll let American allies turn on Washington, they'll let oil prices create domestic unrest in the US, and then, when the blockade quietly ends, Tehran will declare victory without firing a shot. Prediction 3, the real winner will be determined in 6 months, not by who won the blockade, but by who secured new energy partnerships during the crisis. Watch China's LNG deals with Qatar. Watch India's rupee-ruble oil agreements with Russia. Watch Saudi Arabia's petro-yuan contracts. The global energy architecture is being rewritten right now, and America is too busy blockading itself to notice.
The pattern is clear. This isn't a war between America and Iran. This is a war between American assumptions and reality. The assumption that sanctions still work like they did in the 1990s. They don't. The assumption that allies will always fall in line. They won't. The assumption that military force can replace diplomacy. It can't. We're watching in real time the gap between American self-perception and American capability. And that gap is not closing. It's widening. There's a concept in Chinese philosophy called breaking the mirror. It means the moment when an empire stops recognizing its own reflection. When Rome sacked Carthage but called it peacekeeping. When Britain claimed India for the civilizing mission. When the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan for security. The empire looks in the mirror and sees a hero. The world sees something else. America is at that mirror right now. It sees a blockade as strength. The world sees self-sabotage. It sees demands as negotiation. The world sees ultimatums. It sees primacy.
The world sees desperation. The Strait of Hormuz isn't just a geographic choke point, it's a psychological one. And the question isn't whether Iran will blink. The question is whether America can recognize itself in the mirror before it's too late. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for analysis the mainstream won't give you. And remember, this is educational content, not advocacy. I'm not telling you what to think, I'm giving you the frameworks to think for yourself. See you in the next one.